A medieval queen might sleep beneath silk, dine from silver, command a household of servants, and wear jewels worth more than an entire village. Once labor began, almost none of that could guarantee she would still be alive a few days later. Inside a royal palace, childbirth produced one of the strangest reversals in medieval society. The woman at the center of the kingdom withdrew into a private chamber. Most men remained outside. Ladies, servants, and a midwife took control of the room. Priests prayed. Relics might arrive. Courtiers waited beyond the door for news capable of changing the future of the dynasty. Was the child alive? And for many of the people waiting outside, another question followed immediately. Was it a boy? For a royal mother, birth was intimate, painfully physical, and loaded with politics. A queen was expected to do far more than simply have children. Producing legitimate heirs belonged to the central duties of medieval queenship. Royal marriages could be arranged to end wars, secure territory, settle competing claims, or bind two dynasties together. A young bride might arrive in a kingdom where she knew almost nobody and sometimes spoke a different language from the people surrounding her. Then the waiting began. A daughter could be enormously valuable. Royal daughters became diplomatic marriage partners and could connect powerful families across borders. In most hereditary monarchies, though, a surviving son offered the clearest path toward an uncontested succession. Years without one could turn the queen's private fertility into a kingdom-wide concern. Other branches of the dynasty suddenly attracted attention. Uncles reconsidered their prospects. Foreign courts watched closely. Chroniclers took note. The queen's ability to conceive became political intelligence. No modern pregnancy test could settle the question early. People relied on missed menstruation, visible changes in the body, the woman's own judgment, and the observations of the women closest to her. Once pregnancy seemed certain, the royal household began adjusting around it. Rooms needed preparation. Linen, bedding, food, fuel, attendants, and devotional objects had to be ready. Travel could become more cautious as the pregnancy advanced. Servants absorbed tasks that an ordinary pregnant woman might still be forced to perform herself. A queen had extraordinary advantages. Privacy was rarely one of them. Her changing body became news about the dynasty. By the later Middle Ages, English royal childbirth could involve withdrawal into a prepared lying-in chamber. Few spaces at court became so thoroughly dominated by women. That shift alone was striking. A queen usually lived under nearly constant observation. Servants dressed her. Courtiers watched her meals. Messengers tracked her movements. Ceremony regulated who approached and when. Even a royal bedroom offered little resemblance to modern private domestic space. As childbirth approached, that enormous circle contracted. Trusted ladies stayed. Female servants stayed. Experienced women entered. The king and most other men remained elsewhere. For some of the most vulnerable hours of her life, the queen occupied a version of court temporarily governed by women. The most important woman there might carry very little formal rank. She might be the midwife. A respected midwife earned authority through repeated experience. She had watched labor begin and develop normally. She had seen babies arrive in difficult positions, watched mothers exhaust themselves, and learned the early signs that a delivery was moving into danger. Her knowledge came largely from practice. Universities trained physicians in learned theories of the body. Childbirth still remained mostly in female hands. A midwife might rank socially below nearly everyone else in the palace and understand the immediate situation far better than the king's most educated advisors. For several hours, the dynasty could rest in her hands. The king was usually elsewhere during the delivery. The familiar modern scene of a husband beside the hospital bed, holding his wife's hand while medical staff surround them, fits poorly inside a medieval royal birth chamber. The husband waited in another part of the palace. Male courtiers did the same. Messengers carried information between spaces. Clergy might participate through prayer and spiritual preparation. Physicians or surgeons could be summoned if the delivery became seriously abnormal. The ordinary physical work remained largely with women. Labor itself could also be far more active than many modern depictions suggest. A queen did not necessarily remain flat on a bed throughout delivery. Medieval images and medical writings show women sitting upright, kneeling, squatting, using support, or giving birth while seated. A birthing stool or chair offered a low seat with an opening beneath the laboring woman. An attendant might support her shoulders or torso from behind while the midwife worked in front. The bed still mattered. It provided warmth, rest, and somewhere to recover between contractions. It did not have to dominate every stage of labor. A woman could walk slowly through the chamber. She might shift position, lean against furniture, or place her weight on another woman. Attendants could massage her, bring drinks, support her body, rearrange bedding, and help preserve what little energy remained. Much of that sounds familiar. Experienced attendants needed no modern anatomy textbook to notice when a practice helped. Movement sometimes helped. Warmth helped. Physical support helped. Exhaustion changed everything. Women accumulated these patterns through repeated observation, even when the medical explanations available to them remained deeply incomplete. Royal status made a genuine difference here. A queen's household could supply quantities of linen that would have represented considerable wealth to an ordinary family. Water could be carried without anyone worrying about who would finish the day's agricultural work. Fires could be kept burning. Bedding could be changed. Cloths could be washed and replaced. Food and drink could arrive whenever the queen needed them. Servants handled clothing, washing, chamber maintenance, and almost everything occurring beyond the immediate delivery. If she remained confined for days afterward, nobody informed the Queen of England that the cattle still needed milking. Royal wealth removed a great deal of the ordinary hardship surrounding childbirth. The most dangerous complications remained. A trapped baby, severe bleeding, infection after delivery, or a labor prolonged until complete exhaustion could drive the richest woman in the realm straight into the hard limits of medieval medicine. Silk could do nothing to restore lost blood. Money could not summon antibiotics centuries before they existed. A physician might arrive carrying the finest medical education of his age and still possess no safe answer to many obstetric emergencies. Royal childbirth constantly ran into that limit. The queen could receive almost everything her society knew how to offer. Sometimes her society had no way to save her. Royal families understood the danger because pregnancies happened repeatedly around them. Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III of England, offers a striking example. A remarkable portion of her adult life was spent pregnant, and she produced a large royal family. Dynastically, that counted as success. Edward and Philippa produced sons who could continue the royal line, and children who could connect their family with other powerful houses. Her fertility gave medieval monarchy what it valued enormously: several possibilities for the future. The same story looks different when viewed through Philippa's body. Every surviving delivery eventually created the possibility of another pregnancy, and another, and another. Popular history sometimes treats medieval childbirth as though every labor came close to a 50-50 chance of death. The evidence does not support that picture. Research on aristocratic women in medieval England suggests a maternal death rate per delivery far below some of the dramatic figures repeated in popular accounts. Most women who entered labor survived. Repeated exposure made the risk far more serious across a lifetime. One successful delivery produced celebration. Then the court hoped for another. Royal pregnancy created a peculiar form of privilege. A queen could receive excellent food, heated chambers, expensive cloth, attendants, privacy, and access to some of the most experienced practitioners her society could provide. Success could reward her with greater pressure to become pregnant again. Medicine formed only one layer of protection. Religion entered the chamber as well. Prayer in a medieval royal household did not begin after practical care had been exhausted. Physical assistance and spiritual protection existed together from the beginning. Royal women sometimes had access to sacred objects unavailable to almost anyone else. One remarkable English example was the relic believed to be the Virgin Mary's girdle associated with Westminster Abbey. Evidence from royal household culture places the Virgin's girdle within royal childbirth, where female attendants could handle an object connected with Christianity's most important mother. Imagine the chamber. One woman heats water. Another prepares linen. The midwife watches the progress of labor. Ladies hold and steady the queen. Somewhere nearby rests an object believed to carry the protection of the Virgin Mary. The people inside the room could accept all of those things at once. Other medieval women used prayer rolls and objects commonly described as birth girdles, long strips carrying crosses, images, sacred names, and protective prayers. A surviving late medieval English example has yielded physical traces consistent with actual use during childbirth rather than quiet storage as a devotional possession. Royal mothers belonged to an existing tradition. Rank and wealth allowed them to reach some of its most prestigious objects. Saints connected with pregnancy and birth could be invoked. Prayers might be read aloud or spoken from memory. Sacred objects could be touched, worn, or placed close to the laboring woman. Bringing in a relic did not cause everyone else to stop working. Sacred protection and physical assistance could occupy the same chamber. The limits of medicine made that combination understandable. A mother today can have a fetal heartbeat monitored. Some complications can be detected before delivery. Lost blood can be replaced. Infection can be treated. Emergency surgery can happen within minutes. A medieval queen could occupy the finest chamber in the kingdom while knowing very little about what was happening inside her own body. Faith gave that uncertainty a language. Outside the chamber, politics continued waiting. The sex of the newborn mattered immediately. A healthy prince could settle succession questions that had troubled a kingdom for years. A princess could be welcomed and carry enormous political value. Royal daughters forged alliances through marriage, and some inherited power themselves. A daughter's birth could still leave the demand for a son unresolved. Once the child arrived, another urgent concern appeared: baptism. Infant mortality was high, and baptism carried immense spiritual significance in medieval Christianity. A royal infant might leave the mother's chamber for an elaborate baptism, while the queen herself remained in confinement recovering. She might miss her own baby's baptism. Late medieval evidence shows queens staying secluded after birth, while their newborn entered the public world of royal ceremony without them. The arrangement can feel strange from a modern perspective. You endure the labor, the child arrives. Then nobles, clergy, godparents, officials, and courtiers organize an enormous ceremony around the newborn. You remain in another chamber. That separation reveals something about royal birth. The baby was the queen's child. Within moments, the dynasty had a claim on that child as well. Few examples show that political weight more clearly than Edward of Westminster's birth in 1453. His mother, Margaret of Anjou, had been married to Henry VI for 8 years without producing a surviving child. The absence was already politically uncomfortable. Then Margaret became pregnant at an extraordinarily bad moment. Henry suffered a severe mental collapse. England now had a king unable to respond effectively to the political world around him. Rival noble factions were becoming increasingly dangerous, and the succession carried enormous consequences. On October 13, 1453, Margaret gave birth to a son at Westminster. The Lancastrian dynasty finally had the male heir so many people had been waiting for. Henry could offer almost no meaningful response to the news. Few scenes capture royal childbirth more sharply. The queen had successfully delivered the child her dynasty desperately needed. Political conflict continued while she recovered. The birth intensified disputes over who would govern during the king's incapacity, who would protect the young prince, and who could control access to royal authority. Margaret's son became Edward, Prince of Wales. He grew up within the conflict later known as the Wars of the Roses. One successful birth could close a dynastic question and immediately open several more. Another royal mother reveals a very different limit. Margaret Beaufort was not yet a queen when she gave birth. She belonged to the wider royal dynasty, and her child would eventually become King Henry VII. Her experience exposes how little privilege could do against biology. Margaret was 13. Her husband, Edmund Tudor, was already dead. In January 1457, the young widow gave birth to Henry Tudor inside Pembroke Castle in Wales. The National Archives records the central fact plainly. Margaret was only 13 when her only son was born. The delivery became remembered as an extraordinary ordeal. Years later, her confessor John Fisher emphasized how remarkable it had been for someone so young and physically small to deliver a child successfully. Margaret lived. Henry lived. She never gave birth again. Historians have often suggested that the delivery permanently damaged her ability to have more children, although the surviving evidence cannot prove that explanation. The circumstances are extreme enough without adding certainty where none survives. A 13-year-old girl had become pregnant because dynastic politics placed extraordinary value on her fertility. Royal blood made the pregnancy politically important. Her body remained 13 years old. Margaret's story should not become proof that every medieval noble girl routinely became a mother at that age. Very young elite marriage contracts did exist, while consummation could be delayed. Margaret's pregnancy was exceptionally early and dangerous even within the society around her. That is exactly what makes the case revealing. The royal system could surround a mother with wealth and simultaneously place her in grave danger because her capacity to bear children carried political value. It also corrects another familiar caricature. Royal childbirth did not become dangerous because everyone present was ignorant. Midwives could carry decades of experience. Women knew useful positions for labor. Households prepared carefully. Food, warmth, cleanliness, rest, and physical support all received attention. Their knowledge eventually reached a ceiling. A midwife might recognize that labor was going badly. She could encourage movement. She could change the queen's position. Massage could be used. She could examine whatever her hands could safely reach. Medieval medical texts even discuss manual attempts to correct babies presenting in difficult positions. Some complications eventually exceeded every available technique. Surgical delivery offered no routine rescue for a living medieval queen. Medieval manuscripts contain images of cesarean delivery, though the procedure was usually associated with removing a child from a mother already dead or considered beyond saving, sometimes with the hope that the infant might survive long enough to be baptized. A modern emergency C-section belongs to an entirely different medical system. Reliable anesthesia, sterile operating rooms, transfusions, and surgical methods capable of controlling the resulting trauma did not exist. Severe hemorrhage reduced every advantage in the chamber to one terrifying problem. The women around the queen could see her growing weaker. Someone could run for additional help. They could try the remedies and physical measures they knew. They could pray. They had no way to replace the blood leaving her body. Getting through the delivery itself still did not guarantee survival. A queen who seemed stable that evening might become desperately ill several days later. Postpartum infection was especially dangerous because microorganisms remained unknown. Medieval people valued washing and clean materials, yet they could not see how pathogens moved through hands, cloth, tools, wounds, and bodies. A chamber might appear spotless. Sterility was another matter entirely. Royal resources became useful again during recovery. A queen could remain in postpartum confinement rather than immediately resuming the work of a household. Her ladies and servants handled the surroundings. Meals came to her. Fresh bedding replaced the used linen. Laundry left the room and came back clean. Access could be restricted. Nurses could care for the newborn. A woman recovering from an exhausting delivery could stay in bed without calculating who would prepare dinner for the rest of the family. That created a genuine health advantage even without anyone understanding the clinical mechanisms behind it. Royal motherhood also offered delegation on a scale unavailable to most women. A wet nurse might feed the infant. Other women washed the baby's clothing. Servants kept fires going. Nurses watched the child. As royal children grew, they could receive dedicated attendants and eventually entire households of their own. The richer the infant, the more adults suddenly found employment because the child had been born. That could make royal motherhood feel strangely institutional. A modern mother may leave hospital with a newborn treated primarily as a member of her immediate family. A medieval prince could leave the birth chamber and acquire a public identity almost immediately. Godparents were needed. A household had to be arranged. Titles might follow. Gifts, celebrations, announcements, diplomatic messages, and political calculations could begin almost at once. The queen had delivered her child. The court had received an heir. Those two experiences did not have to feel identical. After recovery, a Christian royal mother could eventually return to church ceremonially. Churching after childbirth was widespread in later medieval England. It marked a woman's return to public religious life following confinement and carried an element of thanksgiving after a safe delivery. For a queen, the ceremony carried political meaning too. She had disappeared from public view while pregnant. She returned, having survived, and perhaps having produced the future king. Motherhood could greatly strengthen her position at court. The mother of the heir possessed a relationship no other courtier could reproduce. If that child became king while still young, his mother might serve as advisor, intercessor, guardian, protector, or regent. Hours spent in a birth chamber could reshape political power for decades. Watching only the queen causes another group to fade from the story, the women surrounding her. Ladies-in-waiting did much more than stand elegantly beside royal clothing. The female household became part of the practical machinery of childbirth. These women controlled access to the chamber, handled objects and supplies, supported the queen physically and emotionally, witnessed events, and carried information between the enclosed birth room and the court beyond it. Among them stood the midwife. Consider her position for a moment. Beyond the chamber were men who commanded armies, castles, estates, and governments. Inside, those powers offered very little. When an heir struggled to be born, the dynasty depended on a woman whose most useful qualification was simple. She had seen this before. Royal childbirth appears more clearly in surviving evidence than ordinary childbirth because royal households bought supplies, paid servants, transported relics, organized ceremonies, and carefully recorded the arrival of heirs. Something central remains difficult to recover. A chronicle can tell us that the prince was born. An account can list the cloth purchased. A church record can preserve the baptism. Political histories explain what the child meant for the succession. Very few sources describe the queen's experience minute by minute. We cannot know which contraction frightened her most. We usually do not know whose arm she held. We cannot recover what she said when exhaustion became overwhelming. We do not know how long the quiet moments felt while every woman in the room waited for the sound of the child crying. Those details belong to a female space that rarely produced its own written account. So what did childbirth actually feel like for a medieval queen? She entered it with advantages almost nobody else could match. A protected chamber, large supplies of linen, warmth, food, servants, experienced women, respected midwives, physicians when necessary, sacred objects carrying enormous prestige. Afterward, she might spend weeks recovering while other people performed the work around her. Royal status added its own weight to every contraction. Her pregnancy could reshape alliances. The sex of the baby could alter the succession. Years without children could weaken her standing. A surviving son might make her politically formidable. The death of a child could reopen a dynastic crisis. Every successful delivery could also bring expectations of another pregnancy. A palace could remove many hardships. Human biology remained beyond its command. That makes the royal birth chamber one of the most revealing spaces in medieval society. Outside stood kings, bishops, nobles, officials, soldiers, messengers, and men whose signatures could send armies across kingdoms. Inside was one woman in labor. Her ladies supported her. Servants carried water and linen. A sacred relic might rest nearby. The midwife watched, listened, and waited. For a few hours, an entire kingdom had to confront something rulers rarely enjoyed confronting. Nobody could order the next moment to happen correctly. A medieval queen might possess more wealth and authority than almost any woman alive. The thing she needed most remained beyond the purchasing power of the kingdom: certainty that both mother and child would still be alive when morning came.